The next morning arrived gray and unwelcoming. Martha wrapped her threadbare cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she made her way to the corner store, that precious $10 bill tucked safely in her coat pocket. She needed bread and maybe, if she was lucky, a can of soup that would last her through the weekend. Her Social Security check wouldn't arrive for another 5 days, and her cupboards echoed with emptiness. She was halfway to the store when she heard it, a sound that made her stop in her tracks. Someone was crying. Not the soft whimper of sadness, but the raw, broken sobs of a soul in genuine distress. Martha's instinct was to keep walking. She had her own problems, after all. But she'd been raised by parents who believed that character was defined by what you did, when nobody was watching, when helping cost you something you couldn't afford to give. Around the corner, slumped against a brick wall next to a battered motorcycle, sat a young man who couldn't have been older than 30. His leather jacket was scuffed, his jeans torn at the knees, and his face was buried in his hands. The motorcycle beside him had clearly seen better days, smoke wisping from its engine. "Son?" Martha's voice was gentle as she approached. "Are you all right?" The man looked up, revealing eyes red from crying and a face weathered beyond his years. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll move along. His voice cracked. "My bike broke down and I don't have money to fix it. I was on my way to my daughter's hospital. She's having surgery today and I promised I'd be there when she woke up. I promised her." Martha's heart clenched. She knew about broken promises, about the desperation of wanting to be somewhere for someone you loved. "Where's the hospital?" "2 states over. In Michigan. I've been riding since yesterday, trying to make it before her surgery at noon. But now—" He gestured helplessly at the motorcycle. "A mechanic said it needs a part that costs at least $300. I've called everyone I know. I've got nothing. And my little girl's going to wake up without her daddy there." The young man's name was Derek, and as Martha listened to his story, she learned about his 6-year-old daughter, Emma, who was having heart surgery. He told her about his wife who'd left when Emma got sick, about working 3 jobs to pay medical bills, about this motorcycle being his only transportation. Every word he spoke painted a picture. Martha understood too well. The picture of someone hanging on by their fingernails, trying desperately not to fall. Martha's hand found the $10 in her pocket. It wasn't enough to fix a motorcycle. It wasn't enough to get Derek to Michigan. It wasn't even enough to feed her properly through the week. But as she looked at this broken young father, she thought about her own daughter, living somewhere in California, too busy with her own life to call more than twice a year. She thought about second chances and small miracles and the way kindness rippled outward in ways you could never predict. "Here." Martha pressed the bill into Derek's hand. "It's not much, but maybe it'll get you some gas, or food or help toward that part." Derek stared at the money, then at Martha, taking in her worn shoes and faded dress. "Ma'am, I can't take this. You look like you need it more than I do." "I need to know that little girl has her father with her today," Martha said firmly. "That's what I need. You take it. You find a way to get to your daughter." Tears spilled down Derek's cheeks as he stood and wrapped Martha in a careful hug. "I don't know how to thank you. I don't even know your name." "Martha Henderson." "And you don't need to thank me. You just be there for your little girl." Martha walked home without her bread and soup, her stomach empty but her heart somehow fuller than it had been in months. She'd done what she could. It wasn't much, but it was something. What Martha didn't know was that Derek belonged to a motorcycle club, not a gang, but a brotherhood of riders who'd banded together years ago with the mission of helping people in need. Most of them had their own stories of hard times and unexpected kindness from strangers. When Derek called his club president, a man named Marcus, and told him about the elderly woman who'd given her last money to help him get to his daughter, something extraordinary began to take shape. Marcus had a contact at a motorcycle repair shop who rushed the part over free of charge, getting Derek on the road within hours. Derek made it to Michigan just as Emma was being wheeled out of recovery. He was there when she opened her eyes, just like he'd promised. But that was only the beginning. "We need to find out about this Martha Henderson," Marcus told the club that night. "We need to know her story." It took them less than 24 hours to learn everything. They discovered she was a widow living in near poverty, that she survived on a tiny pension, that she'd given away money she desperately needed. They learned about her empty refrigerator, her unpaid medical bills, her failing heater as autumn turned colder, and they learned that she'd never asked anyone for help. Never complained, never expected anything in return for her kindness. The next afternoon, Martha was heating water for tea. She'd run out of tea bags days ago, but hot water in a mug felt comforting anyway when she heard it. At first, she thought it was thunder, but the sound was too rhythmic, too purposeful. It grew louder, a rumbling that made her windows rattle in their frames. When she pulled back her curtain, her mouth fell open. Motorcycles, dozens of them lining both sides of her street. She counted 20, then 30, then stopped counting as they kept coming. 50 bikers, all wearing the same patch on their leather jackets, all parking in front of her building. Martha's first instinct was fear. What had she gotten herself into? But then she saw Derek climbing off his bike, and beside him was a little girl with bandages peeking out from her shirt collar, holding her father's hand and smiling. The knock on her door came moments later. Martha opened it to find Derek and Marcus standing there, with Emma peeking shyly from behind her father's legs. "Mrs. Henderson," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "Derek told us what you did, how you gave everything you had to help a stranger. We're here to return the favor and then some." What happened next felt like a dream. The bikers flooded into her building, not with menace, but with purpose. They'd brought everything. Boxes of groceries filled her kitchen until the cupboards overflowed. They'd collected money, thousands of dollars, to pay her rent for the next year and cover her medical expenses. They brought a brand new heater, installed it on the spot, and filled her home with warmth she hadn't felt in years. They brought clothes and blankets and household supplies. But more than that, they brought something Martha had lost: community. Each biker took a moment to shake her hand, to tell her their own story of kindness received when they needed it most, to explain that her single act of generosity had reminded them all why they did what they did. Emma presented. Martha with a drawing she'd made in the hospital, a picture of an angel with a halo that looked suspiciously like Martha's silver hair. "You saved me from breaking my promise to my daughter," Derek said, his voice breaking. "You gave when you had nothing to give. That kind of heart deserves to be honored." Martha wept openly as these strangers turned family, transformed her life in a single afternoon. They set up a fund to ensure she'd never go hungry again. They organized a rotating schedule to check on her, to help with errands, to make sure she was never alone unless she wanted to be. They'd even contacted her daughter in California, who was now on a plane home, shocked and ashamed to learn how her mother had been living. As the sun set that evening and the bikers prepared to leave, Martha stood in her doorway watching them. Her apartment was warm, her refrigerator was full, and her heart was overflowing. She thought about that $10 bill, about how close she'd come to holding on to it, about how different this moment would be if she had. "Mrs. Henderson?" Emma had slipped her small hand into Martha's. "Daddy says you're a hero. Are you?" Martha looked down at this precious child with the healing heart, then out at the line of motorcycles and the family they represented. "No, sweetheart. I just did what anyone should do. I helped when someone needed it. The heroes are all these people who helped me in return." But Emma shook her head with the certainty of a child who knew better. "Daddy says real heroes give even when it costs them everything. That's what you did." Maybe she was right. Or maybe the real lesson was simpler than that. Kindness is never wasted. Generosity is never forgotten. And sometimes when you give away your last bit of hope, the universe conspires to return it to you, multiplied beyond measure. Martha had spent her last $10 on a stranger's dream and received in return not just material comfort, but something far more valuable: proof that humanity, at its core, was still good, that there were still people who noticed, who cared, who showed up when it mattered. That night, as Martha lay in her warm bed with a full stomach for the first time in months, she heard the rumble of a single motorcycle passing beneath her window. Through the glass, she could see Derek waving up at her, Emma secure in the sidecar he'd just installed. Martha waved back, smiling through fresh tears. She'd given her last dollar, expecting nothing in return, and gained an entire family in the process. Life, she realized, still offered second chances. Sometimes they just arrived on two wheels, carried by 50 angels in leather jackets who understood that the measure of humanity wasn't in what you kept but in what you gave away.